The idea of the chapel started by coming into the space and thinking how a public space works within a community. So I started thinking about trying to make work that would relate to religious motifs, relate to some of the ideas that are in religious imagery, particularly Christian imagery. The painting that is the center of the show is called The Flaying of Marseilles. For this, one of the initial things that I started thinking about was the representation of violence, particularly as a painter who's dealing with East Africa, and often subjects that I approach are in relation to violence against a body. I wanted to try and broaden that out, so this idea of violence wasn't seen as something that could be owned by a specific place. So I started thinking of images and stories within Western culture and came across the Flaying of Marseilles, so one of the Greek myths. There's also a painting by Titian of the same name that was kind of the catalyst for making this painting as it is. I started looking at the story of Conjestina Cheng, who was a world boxing champion, and she was one of our heroes. She had a very public breakdown. The media then would go and see her while she was institutionalized. And so I started thinking of having these kind of quite demonic nuns. They're quite ghostly figures, and they're kind of floating in and out of the background. In a lot of the instances when I was looking into moments of possession and points at which people were said to have the devil in them, it was very often women. Goya is featured, as he often does within my work, he's featured quite heavily at different stages of the paintings, whether it's within the representation of witches or the way he tells the story, the use of caricature to tell quite a difficult story. To go from that, I found some footage of an exorcism in Tanzania, and it was set in a very large open kind of square with some dilapidated buildings on the edges. On one side of the square were all women, on the other side were all the men. And the man who came to exorcise these evil demons from the women would stand in the middle. He got somebody to wave a red handkerchief of his around, and at that point the women who were possessed started crawling out of the crowd, and some tackled him, some were shaking, some started eating grass. Like, these sort of representations are very familiar throughout that part of the world. I really wanted the surface of the paintings to be something that would locate the work, locate the subject matter, locate the language very much in East Africa. When I found the Labugo bark cloth, this was in a tourist market, and the cloth was being used just as a sort of coaster, a placemat. When I started looking into the material so that I could actually buy some, I found that it was the most culturally significant product of the Buganda people in Uganda. Once I got to the point where I had stretched it and started using it as a surface to paint on, all its irregularities and different ways in which it resists being painted on became more important, and also began to really change how I made the paintings. They changed technically how I was doing it. My paintings became much thinner, much more layered, and a much slower process than I had before.